Good morning, everyone. First of all, can you hear me? Okay. I'm a little soft-spoken, and I've been told to speak up, so I want to make sure I'm projecting well this morning. First of all, thank you very, very much for having me join your meeting here today. I'm going to share with you some strategies around servant leadership and how we built servant leadership into an organizational strategy at the Cleveland Clinic to transform the culture there. But this presentation probably is not going to mean much to you if you don't have a state of mind that we want to get into right now. And that state of mind is the power of one, the power of you. During this presentation, I'd like you to think about yourself as a CEO of your job, okay? Whatever role you have, you are the CEO. And fully accountable for the results, fully responsible for the results, and fully responsible for making the changes that you may need to make in your organization. Because there's some principles here that I want to share with you about making those kinds of changes. But if you don't think of yourself empowered enough to make those changes, and you think that they're maybe above you, your pay grade, or they really belong to somebody else, and relying on whoever they are, and we all know that people point to they in the organization all the time, all right? So for this moment, there's nobody they out there, but there's only you. As the CEO, you're the CEO of your organization, your job, of your area of responsibility, no matter where it may be. Are you with me on that? Let's step back, okay? Tell yourself 3 times, I am the CEO of my organization. I am the CEO of my job. I am the CEO of myself, okay? So from there, we can move on. What are some of the desired outcomes I'd like to have as a result of the conversation? We're going to be talking about how to build an engaged organization, but I'd like you to walk away with the understanding that building an engaged organization is not just a set of tactics, things that you do that could look like a fad. All right? If it's not linked to a broader organizational change strategy, you're probably not going to maintain the momentum. It's not going to be sustainable. People aren't going to understand what you're doing. If you link it to a strategy around creating change, you have the ability to optimize your effort. So if there's one thing I want you to walk away with, hopefully there will be others, but this idea of building an engaged enterprise is about an organizational change process. I'm going to be linking the presentation around 5 core principles that I've written about in a book, and hopefully these principles will serve you as guiding, as a description of some guiding principles. They're not prescriptions. Like if you do these 5 things, you're going to build an engaged enterprise. They're meant to be like guardrails on a highway. There's plenty of room to maneuver between those guardrails before you're going off the road, right? So the point is that you'll have the ability to think about how they apply to your organization. I'll be asking you some questions about how they might apply. So be prepared to write some notes to yourself and to answer some of these questions, and keep track of these along the way. And then finally, I'll give you some examples of that might be a little more tangible in terms of some tactics that we did employ as part of that broader strategy that you may be able to think about and use. So fair enough? Okay. Let's talk about this idea of engagement. This is a misused, overused, underused term that over time becomes nebulous and very, very confusing. This is a definition that I've landed on, not all my original thought, but it's a very simple definition to think about engagement. I've highlighted some of the key areas here, right? And I like to think about it in simple terms. And first of all, it's a heightened emotional and intellectual connection to the organization, the colleagues, to the mission of the organization. Now, these 2 words, emotional and intellectual, both of them have to be there. We can have a lot of emotional people going around doing all the wrong things, okay? Out of the goodness of their heart because they're really emotional. But unless you have the intellectual piece of like doing the right things for the organization that you want them to be doing, then you have a little bit of chaos on your hands, right? And if you have that heightened emotional, intellectual connection, you're going to have people give you their discretionary effort. Now, we all know we come to work every day with so much in the bank, so much in the tank, all right? And we're going to give we make decisions every day of just how much of the discretionary effort that we're going to give every day. But if people will have that connection, they're going to give us more of that discretionary effort and more often. Any questions? Thoughts? Okay. There are some key drivers of engagement in an organization, and servant leaders, we'll see later on, tend to really drive more of these key behaviors. By the way, these are not all of the key drivers that an organization that create engagement. But these are 7 that I've landed on over the years, right? And they're not a hierarchy, like but these apply differently to different organizations. And the first one is that the organization cares about me, and I could probably put that right up there as number 1, right? My opinions count. Do people just ask me to do the work, or they actually ask me, what do I think about the job? Is the work stimulating? Is there opportunities for organizational development and growth, or is this as far as I'm going to go, in my career? Are there opportunities for professional development? Is anybody watching me and recognizing the work that I do, or does it just kind of go over everybody's head? What's the relationship between my supervisor and my colleagues? Probably the biggest impact of engagement is that front end interaction with your immediate supervisor, and this is where servant leadership comes into play and why it's so important. And then finally, are people actually connected to the mission of the organization? So 7 areas of key drivers of engagement in organizations. By the way, I can make these slides available to the group here. I don't know Dick, if you have a website or something that, take whatever notes you have, but don't have to be compelled to write everything down. We'll make these slides available so you have it as a reference. So some key drivers that really drive, that build engagement throughout the organization.
Joe, could you give us an example of one of those that pops up for you, experience you've had?
Yeah, I would say one of the top one, actually 2. Right? I would say that when people aren't going to care about the customer or the patient or whatever it is until they start to feel cared for. And I've seen that happen over and over and over again in organizations. And I'll talk to some examples of that in my case study at the Cleveland Clinic. All right, we had a very demoralized organization, and when we actually began to thank people, build a strategic program on how to do that, we saw engagement begin to really grow and escalate. We had a very low connection with the organization's missions, and in a hospital, that's pretty scary. I worked 25 years in the computer industry, as Dick said, with Hewlett-Packard, Compaq, and Digital Equipment Company, and I didn't see too many people die hooking up a computer. Okay, right? Although the mission is very important for the customer, and we thought we had a mission-driven organization, but when you have 150,000 people die every year throughout the country by conditions that were caused in a hospital or medical errors, right? The mission at the hospital is mission critical. So we launched a program to get everybody to feel like they were part of the mission, and we began to cut down on our medical errors and whatever. So I would say if I had to pick 2 that would stand out, that are really compelling, it's, do people care about me here, and am I connected to the mission? So these are some information from the Gallup Corporation, which I'll be referring to, and these are some very important statistics. What does an engaged organization look like from a statistical standpoint? Now, Gallup, when I first heard these numbers, I was a little surprised that, according to their research, it takes 4 highly engaged people just to negate the 1 negative person, toxic individual in an organization. 4 to 1. At first, I didn't believe that. I go, come on, you know. But if we think about it from our own experience, think about that one toxic person in the organization. How many workarounds you have to have? How many meetings with them that you don't have because you're afraid of how they're going to react, and a short conversation could turn into a long conversation and probably an emotional one, okay, right? And the extra people you have to hire just to work around these toxic individuals, right? That number starts to get very, very understandable, right? So somewhere between that ratio, 4 to 1 and 9.5 to 1, are degrees of an engaged organization from a statistical standpoint. So I thought this was very, very good information to get us grounded on what it looks like. What are some of the benefits of having a highly engaged organization? The research is rich on this, that organizations that have higher levels of engagement have higher business performance across multiple levels: revenue, shareholder return, productivity, absenteeism, all right? Again, I'll point out later that I think servant leadership leads to higher engaged organizations and therefore better results, and I'll point to some companies that actually perform at this level. But if we could all agree on this, and it's very readily that we can agree that this is an important piece of an organization's history and journey to have higher engagement, according to Gallup, only 30% of the Americans who work fall into the category of being engaged. Only 30%. So it's a real problem in every organization, except that 30%. When I go out and talk to clients these days, first thing I ask them is, do you have a strategic plan? And 70% of them do. And then I ask them, of that 70%, how many have a people and culture component of that strategic plan that's just as important as the business results and the growth and the revenue? I get about 30% of the hands come up. And so is it any wonder that this idea of engagement continues to be a problem in most organizations around the country? Not surprising. So, how do you build this engaged enterprise anyway? You know, so this is, if we can all agree that this is important, and it's something that we want to tackle because we're the CEO of our organization, we're the CEO of our job. What are some ideas on how to go about this to really build the case? I'm going to give you 5 core principles, and I'll be building off this from my experiences at the Cleveland Clinic. First part is real change starts with real dissatisfaction. Anybody here ever make any personal change? Whether it's a relationship, whether it's a habit, that didn't start with some real dissatisfaction with where they were today. You know, dissatisfaction is the catalyst that creates some change, that gets us moving, all right? Again, if you don't care, they won't care. Principle number 2. What are some ideas to build that into the organization? When a mission becomes personal, it becomes a cause. I have seen so many mission statements that hang on the wall. And I work for companies that have it hanging on the wall, right? But until you take that mission statement off the wall and start talking about it, get people talking about it and making it personal, about how they see themselves in that mission statement, how their job is important, it just becomes a mission statement on the wall. People do not get behind mission statements, but they will get behind a cause. Think about the cause that you may have in your personal life. It might be a community organization or a religious organization, all right, where failure is unacceptable. Well, that's the kind of passion that we as leaders need to build in our organizations, to take this mission statement and make it a cause. Old habits die hard. We're creatures of habit. And so we've got to hardwire some of the changes in our organization so that we don't slip back into all the bad habits that we've had. And there are some levers that you can exercise to do that, and I'll explain that. And then we have to be realistic about making a change. It's about building pyramids and not sandcastles. Nobody expects a sandcastle to last after the tide goes out or comes in. But pyramids have been around a long time, and they've been worked on foundationally, and they've stayed the test of time. So 5 core principles to be thinking about and how you can apply them in your organization. Again, I'll be drawing from my experience at the Cleveland Clinic. I was recruited from Boston to come out to this job, and the CEO wanted to hire a chief HR officer from outside of the industry because he felt that some of the best practices in this area did not necessarily reside in healthcare in 2008. Our CEO is a former Dr. Toby Cosgrove. He was a leading heart surgeon for 35 years, and the Cleveland Clinic is a physician-led organization, meaning that the CEO and most of the senior positions are run by doctors, okay, which I've really come to appreciate over the years of what a powerful way that is to run a hospital, right? But we had a problem in that the rules of healthcare were changing in 2008, meaning that the patient experience now was becoming important. And to use his words, the Cleveland Clinic is a place where the sickest people in the world come to, and 99% of them come home. But our patients don't like us very much. You know, that's not a good thing when your revenues now and your reimbursements are tied to the patient experience because it's measured by the government. Right? It's not a very good thing in terms of your hospital recognition or reputation to have a poor patient experience out there. And the clinic was the number 4 ranked hospital in the country at that time. It's number 2 now. But the hardest thing for any organization to do is to change when it's successful. As I mentioned, you got to have some dissatisfaction with where you're at today. And people were pretty satisfied. See, we're the number 4 ranked hospital in the country. Tell me why we need to change? I mean, what's the problem? Okay. And by the way, I asked them the same way. You know, I'm someone that likes to be gainfully employed. Okay. Yeah, I'm being recruited out to Cleveland from Boston, and you know, I grew up in Northeast Ohio, and I spent most of my young adult life trying to get out of Warren, Youngstown, Ohio. Okay. All right. And so I wasn't necessarily looking to go back to Northeast Ohio and Cleveland. Okay, and fail. When an organization says they want to change, but they really don't because they're number 4 in the country. Geez, why change, right? Well, we had some dissatisfaction. And the CEO convinced me that he really felt that he needed to make the change. Here were the reasons why, all right? And really felt that if done right, the chief HR officer would play a key role, particularly to help us build a services culture on top of the great clinical culture that we had. What were some of the dissatisfaction? Well, here are the results of the 2008 HCAP surveys. Those who work in healthcare here, know what this is, right? But it's the government surveys across these multiple dimensions, all right? From communications to pain management, so on and so forth, all right? But as you can see, the Cleveland Clinic was average at best when you look at that circle there, okay, all right? And that was very concerning, to a point. Because what happens when you get data that you don't like? You discount and refute the data. Okay, geez, how can this be right? Okay, they're measuring the wrong things. Does any of this really result in better patient care anyway? Okay, and debating back and forth, and finally I said, look, we've got lobbyists in Washington working on these dimensions to change them if they needed to change over time, all right? But this is what we're measured on, okay? This is the data. We have to accept that. And by the way, it's gone public. You can get on websites, and we have a hospital report card on the HCAP scores, okay? So, we have to really think seriously about this and just accept the data for what it is. We kind of got there, not right away, but we got there. The handwriting was on the wall. We just had to accept this, right? What was some other dissatisfaction that we had that created some real energy? Well, we did our first engagement survey in 2008, and you can see we came out at that ratio of engaged to disengaged of 2.8 to 1, significantly below that neutral spot. All right. Wasn't very good. Okay, right. Now, I'm a real proponent of management by walking around. Does everybody know what that means? That was popularized many years ago by Walter Hewitt from Hewlett Packard, all right? Where he said that if you waited on surveys, can never be the substitute of good management. If you have to wait for a survey to tell you that your people are unhappy, you're not really leading as a leader, right? Manage by walking around, listening to people, maybe even eavesdropping, okay, all right? Asking them what's keeping them up at night, and you'll learn how people feel. So I didn't need a survey to tell me that we had some problems, all right? In fact, I remember a story. I hadn't really started yet. I was on a house hunting trip from Boston to Cleveland, and just so happened at 7 o'clock in the morning, there was a staff meeting, with all the physicians to get an update from the CEO. So we're in a big auditorium, and every seat in the back row was taken except one, all right? And of course, everybody in the front row, just kind of like church, from the back row on, was totally empty, okay? And then at 7 o'clock in the morning, this is another thing I had to get used to at healthcare, right? Early hours. 10 minutes? Okay, all right. So here we are. This is where we were at. Bad news. And so I asked the doctor if I could sit in this chair, and he said, sure. I said, well, looks like we don't have assigned seats here. And he said, well, no. They treat us like children around here, right? So there's a data point, okay, all right? There's certainly a data point. So you don't need a survey to tell you, okay, that you've got some issues. If you don't care, they won't care. The biggest way to demonstrate that you care is having people have a good experience with your frontline manager. And so we introduced this idea of this concept of servant leadership. This is, of course, Greenleaf's definition of that, looking to serve first, all right, as opposed to leading first, all right? What Dick laid out is the difference between command and control and servant leadership. Now, command and control is not necessarily a bad form of leadership. Anybody here ever been in the military? Okay. When someone says incoming, hit the deck, you hit the deck, all right? Because people can die, all right? If you're in surgery and you need something, you need something. I played 4 years of Big Ten football in Northwestern. When it's third short, and the coach calls the play, you don't do consensus management in the huddle, all right? I think we should go off tackle, or I think we should pass, or maybe we should let some air out of the football or something like that, okay? I'm from Boston, I can say that. Okay. So, but if it's the only form of leadership that you're using, it can create fear, shut people down, and they're only going to give you what their job description is. All right? Again, more data to show that servant leaders build better engaged organization, create loyal customers, and superior results. All right? Study done over the last 10 years to actually demonstrate that. So it's not just a nice thing to do. It's a good business thing to do. And we don't have time for fads that are just nice things to do. At least ask the organization to get mobilized around a fad. We used a model from Dr. Ken Jennings, who's a thought leader around this, that he boiled down this idea of servant leadership into what are the 5 behaviors that servant leaders do, and he called it serving leaders, all right? Because it talks about servant leader in action. So it became very useful in our organization. And they get people to run to a great purpose. They blaze the trail, they remove obstacles, they raise the bar. A big myth about servant leadership that it's a soft form of leadership. It's not. If you're not raising the bar and stretching people, we're not serving them. Builds on strengths, and of course upends the pyramid. It puts people in the organization first. So this was a very useful model for us, and we implemented it throughout the organization in a lot of training, creating awareness, put into develop, and then over time was integrated into all of our performance management systems that we had to support people and grow people. You have to demonstrate on a personal, not just on an enterprise level, that you care about people, but you have to do it on a personal level as well. And what we had was we had a lot of unhealthy people serving our patients. So we launched a very aggressive wellness program that helped us demonstrate that we care. By the way, we made it free. And I remember our CEO telling me, Joe, this is not the way we do things around here, okay, all right? We asked people to come up with the money, okay? And then we asked people to show results. I mentioned to them that this is the one thing that will demonstrate that we really care about our people, and they're going to know that it's different. So we had thousands of people join the program. We lost a lot of weight, okay, and people were healthier. Power of a thank you. We launched our recognition program where you could go online and get people to thank somebody for doing a good job, send them a certificate, supporting their value, and their boss got copied on this, all right? So you had a lot of this compounding effect. You not only thanked you, I thanked you, but your boss found out that someone thanked you, all right? And that was a powerful way to use recognition. Again, when mission becomes personal, it becomes a cause. We changed some of our institutional language. Language is a very powerful thing in an organization. It's loaded with values and beliefs. The way we talked about people who worked at the clinic, there was the professional staff and the non-professional staff. I mean, that's not even a subliminal message, okay, all right, about who's important, okay, right? So we changed the idea that everybody was a caregiver. Whether you cleaned the rooms, whether you took a valet ticket, whether you're a nurse or a doctor, whether you call up somebody about their bill, okay? Everybody was a caregiver that had a touch point in creating an experience. And we took everybody offline over a 9-month period to sit down and talk about. We took the mission statement off the wall to sit down and talk about how everybody had an opportunity to actually create that impression. Old habits die hard, so you've got to hardwire the change. We built a set of management metrics that become part of the monthly review process. And we treated this engagement progress just like every part of the operation, and had people come in to visit the executive team, frontline leaders, to talk about what they were doing and why it was important. And that really helped us get the C-suite more in touch with what was going on in the organization, and gave people an opportunity to really make a presentation in front of the executive team, and sent tremors throughout the organization. And it's not about building pyramids. It's not about sandcastles. It's about pyramids. And we had some progress over those 5 years. Again, we started out at below neutral at 2.8 to 1. And by the end of 2013, 2014, that ratio was over 10 to 1. So we were working at a world-class level. Our patient experience, that red line, mapped right along with that blue line, which was our engagement scores. Oh, and by the way, our philanthropy was up 47% over that 5-year period. That's just the grateful patients. It's not any kind of program, building a building or anything. Most hospitals can't survive without philanthropy, all right? So that was up. So if we saved your life, but you had a terrible experience, you probably wouldn't be a grateful patient, all right? And again, all this is in my book, my couple of books, the book and my workbook, and I thank you for your time and attention. So.
Questions?
Yes.
This is probably just an external factor, but one can't help listening to the reference about 2008.
Yes.
And there were a lot of things going on. There was the
Yes.
job market, there was the housing market,
Yes.
there was the economy.
Yes.
To what extent did
Yes.
some of your findings internally
Yes.
were affected by external factors?
This is a great question. We, if you notice on the first year, our engagement was flat. And there are a lot of reasons for that. One is we didn't really get the frontline leaders involved in engagement enough, all right, okay? And I went to Gallup and I said, look, I like to be somebody who's gainfully employed, okay? And if I don't start getting some movement on these scores, okay, you know, someone's gonna look at me and say, I'm the problem, all right? So what's the one thing, if we do this one thing really, really well, we can start to get some movement. And that one thing is getting leaders on a local level, every work unit, every nursing unit, every division, to write a plan. Take the information, sit down with your people, take ownership, get people to take ownership of their own work engagement, all right, and get them to build a plan that's measurable, that they can track throughout the year. Now, during that period, and by the way, we started to get that spike. From 2009 and 2010, we had several things going on. We were in a recession, we had 2 salary delays, and we closed the hospital in the inner city, all right? closing a hospital is like closing a Catholic church, okay? It's a very emotional thing, okay? All right, very emotional. And our engagement continued to spike during that period because we took 43,000 people offline as part of these workshops that I just mentioned and got them to feel like they were part of the mission and they turned that mission into a cause. So you can grow engagement. It's harder during difficult times, and we did. Yes?
You mentioned that 40% of my rating or score was now engagement or people focused.
Yes.
How did you manage that process? Did managers have to sit down with employees? You mentioned here that you
Yeah.
gave everyone the responsibility
Yes.
to write their own plan, and did that mean
Yeah.
that 1% of my activities now was worth 40% of my performance review, or did you change my job description so that
Yeah.
40% of what I
Yeah.
do during the day
Yeah.
should be facing somebody else
Yeah.
and making a difference?
This is a real good question. I hear this a lot. First of all, when we didn't get that growth after the first year, our CEO said this is the worst news he had heard in 5 years. Okay, so I had to take him out for a scotch. Okay, all right. I said, Doctor, I've been here, a year. I've heard some pretty bad news. You know, some of that news wound up in the Cleveland Plain Dealer. Okay, right, about some of our mistakes. All right, but the engagement score didn't go up. But you know, I work with that to satisfaction, and I said, let's weight performance. So he's at 40%. Now it's not 40% now, okay? But we needed to send a message. Now that was important. Now you'd think that if 40% of my performance evaluation was measured on this, that I'd find out how to I'd write a plan, right? Wrong, okay? People were hoping for that fad to fade away too, okay, all right? So we kind of had a quality inspect over 4,000 plans because frankly, people didn't know how to write a good plan on this topic. So it was a coaching session. And we built some skills, and this wasn't an inspection, okay? It wasn't, we weren't going to hit you over the head or punish you, but we're going to coach you on how to build this plan, all right? And by the way, we landed on this 40% because some of the best-in-class organizations, on these companies that make the Fortune 100, you look at where they're spending their time, probably 40% of their time around people issues, leadership, getting to know your people. So I hear this a lot. It's like, geez, if I'm doing this work, how can I do my leadership work? I said, well, this is your leadership work, okay? Okay? Figure out how to I can't answer the question, but figure out how to reprioritize, your work day. So you're working on what's most important to you and your organization. That's working with your people. So I hope that helps. Yes?
So, the survey by which you are scoring, putting an objective number on the engagement level, is that something that's, you could share or make available? I'm assuming it's a survey. I don't know how you
Yeah.
got the numbers.
Yeah, that's proprietary information from the Gallup Corporation. That when we use them to survey that, so I don't know what their formula is, okay, but they have, it's a 12-question survey. It's easy to take. You can add your own information on it, but that's something that they've worked in and validated over the years. It's the best I can offer you on that point. Yes.
Just to follow up to that question, is this a net promoter score that you were measuring? I mean, is that what you're aiming at, or are you aiming at the answers to some particular questions?
Well, it's the answer to those questions, okay? So it's not necessarily a net promoter on more business or generating any other type of change in the organization, right? But we've tracked those units that have higher levels of engagement and track that against some of our quality survey. And what we found was that those units that had higher levels of engagement were almost 45% greater in reporting medical errors or stopping a procedure before it went any further. Now you would say that, geez, what's behind that? Well, trust, okay? When you're all scrubbed up and you're ready to have a procedure and somebody touches something that they're not supposed to touch or whatever, and you got to do the whole, kind of re-scrub all over again, when you have a backlog behind you, those organizations that have a higher level of trust will do that. higher levels of engagement, they'll do that. And by the way, you save lives, because as I mentioned, 150,000 people die every year from hospital infections and hospital-caused issues, so. Yes?
Can you elaborate a little bit on how, to what degree did you, in your rollout of this process, talk about the concepts
Yes.
and language of servant
Yes,
leadership?
yes,
training
yes.
process?
Yeah, that's a really important point, because we did not do a hard launch on servant leadership. This is the new, we didn't say this is the new model. Everybody's got to go to mandatory training. We didn't do that because we had the Studer group in the hospital before, the consulting group, and it wasn't successful because it had a lot of prescriptive mandatory things, right? So when we launched servant leadership, our CEO was very adamant about this. Look, I'm not a servant leader, he said. I don't have the reputation of being a servant leader, okay? People will see me as disingenuous, okay, if I all of a sudden wake up as being servant leader, okay, right? I'm a heart surgeon, okay? So I can't be viewed as a fool, okay, right? But you go out there and you talk about servant leadership, you presented it to the executive team in a way that they got it. It was like, the way I presented it was, I gave them plenty of room to maneuver that, hey, maybe servant leadership isn't the model. Here's what it is. I think the most great service organizations have the principles of servant leadership. And if it's not the right model, I'll find another model that fits our culture a little bit better. Okay? But we can't stay over here in command and control and expect to have a service culture in the organization. It just won't happen. Okay? So he agreed to a soft launch after the executive team gave me that executive team nod. You know what that is? That's the nod, but you really don't have agreement. Okay, right? It's just nod, so you get out of the room. All right, all right, all right. And we did a lot of. We spoke at multiple leadership teams, management teams, hospitals, concepts, and shared the concept of servant leadership and how it was different from command and control. And we created this gravity for it, right? And I think our CEO was very wise to take that approach. He said if there's gravity for servant leadership, if people want it, then we'll build some of the programs around it and launch more intensive training, build it into our culture, build it into our performance management systems, and it'll become part of our culture. Yes?
You were showing some of the ratios of engagement and disengagements and showing the improvements over a period of time with your
Yep.
organization that you were overseeing. And the question I had was, as the ratios change and you identify, obviously there was essentially an attitude situation.
Yes.
Right? And that's the difference between engage and disengage, is that how I understand it. And essentially,
Yep.
where the idea with the servant leadership rollout was going to try to help improve that area, which it obviously did, based upon your
Yes.
ratio of engagement to disengagement.
Yep.
The question I have is, with that in mind, was there a change of staff in terms of were you finding in your situation where some people were just not willing to budge?
Yeah. Yes.
You know, I mean, not only that we understand, or I understand that it's difficult. Change is always challenging for everybody. Nobody wants to see a change, but sometimes you run into situations where the attitude just kind of changes.
Yeah.
You know, at what point? You know, and I guess I'm just kind of curious in terms of
Yeah.
the numbers that were reflected. I know that was
Yeah.
done by another company
Yeah.
that you guys hired, but how was that reflected?
Yeah. Let me see if I can give you a short answer to that complicated question. Okay. All right. All right. All right. First, let me say that I could have got the engagement scores to spike without introducing servant leadership. And I've done this work enough. I got a model. I could get a short-term spike on this. All right. And look good for maybe a year and a half, 2 years. All right. But if the CEO came to me during this strategic planning process, which I was part of, and asked me, would this change the culture, this engagement plan, I'd have to say no, if I was honest, okay, all right? I'll get a little spike in the engagement scores, but it's not going to change the culture. We needed something more fundamental. We needed a new leadership model, and that's the servant leader model, okay? So I had a defining moment, you know. because I was warned, you know, the Cleveland Clinic's run by doctors. It's a great organization, but highly political. And here I am, my first 6 weeks on the job, saying you need a new leadership model. Okay, right? That can get a little scary. I got to tell you, I had a sleepless couple of nights over that. All right, but I made a decision. Look, as long as I'm in this job, I'm going to say whatever's needed to be said or do to tell the truth about what needs to change. And if it doesn't fit, I'll pack up and go back to Boston. Okay, all right. I wish I hadn't bought a house in Cleveland either. It made it a little nervous too. Okay, right. But it was a defining moment, and certainly put it out there, and it took hold. Right. So what did we do with? What happened to the individuals that could never get on board with this idea of servant leadership? Now, even in the best organized organizational change effort, you're only going to get 30%, 25 to 30% that get on board right away. And you'll probably have 25 to 30% that will never get on board. Okay, I call them the cynics. Okay, they're not committed to the organization mission. They're committed to their own mission. Then you have the middle third, and those people are skeptics. By the way, we need skeptics. We need people to ask us tough questions. They're committed to the mission, but they just want to be sure this is not a fad. Okay, tell me again why this is good for business. Tell me why, you know, this is going to create a better environment. You know, convince me of that. So I'm dating myself here, but I remember an interview with Casey Stengel. Remember the Casey Stengel, the great baseball coach at the Mets, and you know, and somebody asked him once, you know, what's the key to being a good baseball manager? And Casey said, hey, it's really easy. Just keep the guys that love you away from the guys who hate you, and you're gonna have success. Okay, all right. So the goal is that 30% in the middle that can be influenced either way. You've got to move them up to being part of the organization. All right, they're really catching on. The bottom 25%. If you were a leader and you were in the bottom 25% of engagement for more than 2 years, and weren't doing the things that we're asking you to do to get better and get your organization, because sometimes you just inherit a tough group and it takes some time, so you're going to use some judgment there. But if they're not doing the right things, planning and acting as a servant leader, at least trying, there's sometimes you just have to ask people to get off the bus, okay, and ask them to maybe leadership in this current environment is not for you. Maybe there's a home for you. Try to find one, all right? If not, we love you, but you have to go. You know, yeah.
One more question.
Yes.
You made references to performance management and building skills for others to develop plans. Tell us about the elements that were involved.
Is anybody familiar with this term called SMART goals?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. We use that tool. It was very simple, measurable, actionable things. All right? But it was interesting. People can do that around business, you know, production kinds of things or hospital type things. But when you ask them to sit down and build an actionable goal around, okay, how can we communicate better? Okay, when the shift changes, all right, to ensure, you know, that we are all communicating. That becomes, you know, it becomes a little softer and a little harder. So we help them with that translation.
Excellent. Thank you.
So, thank you.